All right.
I don't think it has to be high pressure, right? We're all just chatting, and it
Yeah,
may or
that
may
was
not be useful.
that was the idea, was just to chat. And especially since you guys already know each other fairly well, it'd be, I mean, I imagine you guys have already talked about this in some form or another. And so it's more just kind of an opportunity for me and then potentially other people to sort of gain from what, your experience doing this kind of teaching. And I apologize. I don't really have like a set of questions or anything. It was more just like to chat, but maybe I could just provide like a little bit of context for why I sort of dragged you guys into this conversation. So Matt Kirschenbaum teaches a class every year, which is like an intro to digital studies class, which is kind of to give master's level students their first kind of taste of digital humanities. A lot of them already sort of know, like the reason why they're there is because they know something about it, right? But some people don't, and they're just kind of, it's like their first sort of foray into digital humanities. And he teaches a bunch of different things. Like it's oriented around like, I think three different units. And one is like focused on sort of text encoding and TEI kind of stuff, which is, it's kind of focused on the archive. That's how he sort of frames it. And text encoding is a part of that. But the classes are, well, I should back up a little bit, like that they're split in two. So it's like one of these 3-hour classes where, it's like, how does anybody pay attention for that long? I don't know. But like the first half is like kind of the readings, sort of like talking about the readings for that week. And a lot of them are quite, I did some of the readings for some of these classes and I was like, this is pretty heavy stuff. Like I had trouble sort of, but the students are sharp and they get it, right? And then the second half of each class is kind of more of a hands-on, kind of sort of applying like loosely like what the readings were about, but in sort of a hands-on way. So the unit about text encoding in the archive is Raf Viglianti, who works a lot with Neil Freistat on the Shelley Godwin archive. They kind of like work on sort of turning some poems into TEI and sort of like start basically not knowing anything. And by the end of I think it's 4 weeks, like they're sort of encoding a simple poem and then sort of putting it on GitHub and stuff like that. Then the second unit is focused on Matt's sort of digital sort of archaeology work. So his basically getting people to use some of his equipment that he has. So he has maybe Miriam, you've been to Myth, so you probably remember like when you walk in, there's like these vintage computer, all these kind of old models of computers, right? And the cool thing is that they still work. And so he gets people to sort of get using software and sort of creating things in these sort of older computing environments. And so the readings all sort of kind of revolve around that. And then he had this idea of adding something about, well, he called it big data, but it was more, the thing that he asked me to do was to walk people through collecting data from Twitter. So this was right when, the last time we taught this was right around when the Documenting the Now project was kind of coming together. And we had built sort of like this data set of Ferguson related Twitter data. And Matt really wanted to introduce people to collecting social media data and then sort of doing very rudimentary sort of analysis of it. And I say rudimentary, but I think he had some hopes for what would happen, right? And I feel like I kind of, to some extent, let him down a little bit. But he wouldn't say that. But I felt like we did collect data. So we collected data with tags, which is like this Twitter archiving Google Sheet, which once you get the keys and things worked out, like you can go and collect Twitter data and it goes into a spreadsheet. And there are certain things you can do within Google Sheets, right? Like where you can kind of like analyze columns for entities and they've got some like very kind of crude sort of like network visualizations of the data you collected. But it's all kind of canned a little bit. And the thing that we sort of ended on was, so there was 4 sessions. The fourth session was basically getting people to do something what we call data stories, and this was the thing that kind of felt like it didn't fully connect, but it was like to try to get the students to look at the data that they collected and sort of construct some kind of narrative about what they collected, and that narrative could be really anything. It was largely textual. It was like, and it was largely dependent on like what kind of how they collected the data in the first place, like what like hashtags or keywords that they were, or usernames they were collecting. So it worked okay, but the thing that Matt really kind of wanted, I think, and that I kind of wanted it to do more with it, was the stuff that you guys have done in terms of like looking at the data as a network. And it's something that we only have 4 sessions, so it's not really that long, really, when you think about it. It's like 4 one-hour sessions. But the first session is sort of introducing this idea of a network, like a graph data model. And the way that we did that was largely just to get people on paper to create graphs that were relevant to them. So have them look at the I'm blanking on his name, the famous Stanford guy who did the Hamlet network visualization.
Ready.
Yeah. But basically getting people to see, like, you can look at Hamlet as a network, right? But then what else can you look at it as a network? So they kind of go away with this assignment to create, just on a piece of paper, a drawing of a network that's relevant to them. And it was really cool because they all came back with like wildly different things, and it was really interesting. But the thing that we were hoping to do was to get them to sort of to make the leap from that paper presentation to something that they could build with a tool. And that's what kind of led me down this path of like, is Gephi or Cytoscape or what are the options for making the leap off of the paper to something sort of computer mediated. Anyway, so that's like in a nutshell the backstory to why I'm sort of pestering you guys. But I'd be curious to hear, I mean, because you all sent me some really awesome material too. So, I mean, the best thing about that is that I haven't had a chance to really dig into it yet, but I suspect that there is stuff that I can use. But I guess I'd be curious to hear from you guys, like how things just worked in practice, and things that worked well, things that didn't work well, things that you expected would go easy but didn't, or the other way around too, like things that you thought would be hard but weren't. Yeah, I mean, that's my way of sort of throwing the question out there, I guess, to see if there's any advice you guys have.
Go first.
Hey, Thomas.
Yeah.
Did you say who's going to go first?
Yeah.
Can you hear Thomas okay, or is it?
He's fairly quiet to me.
Oh, let me see. I can put these headphones on, and then maybe that'll. I think because this has a mic on it, so.
Oh, okay.
Better. See.
Oh yeah, that's a lot better.
Yeah.
Much better. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know, Thomas. Do you want to go first, since you said?
Sure. Probably, I guess a couple of things come to mind. So in terms of setting expectations, the scope of my engagement for this has primarily been like in either a 1 or 3 hour session, right? So in a 1 hour session, there's a pretty limited amount of content that you can get through. In the 3 hour session, it's really still a bear to get through. And in terms of audience, I don't typically actually distinguish between if I'm going to be teaching undergrads or faculty or librarians or archivists. I kind of all think of them as the same. I mean, at least at the introductory level. And the introductory level is like primarily where I've taught this type of content, the network analysis stuff.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I'm at as well, I think.
Yeah. And I should give some attribution. In graduate school, I took a network analysis course that was semester long, taught by Jana Diesner, who Scott probably knows, I would imagine. So a lot of what I've been able to teach in this area has kind of been derived from that particular course. So scoping 1 hour to 3 hours long. Audience doesn't matter as much to me, at least. And then at the introductory level, I found that one of the challenging things to get across is what the value is of the various network metrics are that you can generate. And it's one thing to talk about various types of centrality and their value in principle, but actually transferring that over into an activity where a student or a participant appears to fully grasp that. I've had sort of mixed success. Mm-hmm. I've also kind of felt like a push and pull between sort of the facility that something like Gephi offers you to just manipulate the hell out of the representation of the data, and again, the sort of kind of misleading things that can lead to, and then also trying to carve out a space where perhaps it's okay and that doesn't actually matter, depending on the question that a given person has. If they want to work with I don't know, network, maybe it's network visualization, but it's not network analysis necessarily.
Yeah.
So I've that's sort of an interesting thing to balance. I'd say another challenge is pretty pragmatic in the sense of just data modeling, like how to get across, if you have a given set of things that you're interested in observing in the world or deriving from a text or something like that. How do you model them? And I have a similar exercise where I work through getting participants to basically model the friend of my friend is my enemy, the enemy of my enemy is a friend, and it basically comes out as you can model it as a network graph. And I think to a certain extent it evidences maybe the strength of weak ties thing, but which is kind of cool. But actually, moving from that conceptual step, so there's the conceptual thing, but then also in things like Gephi, how, given basically the constraints of different formats, if you want to model for a CSV, it's pretty simple. But if you want to model for, I think it's GraphML or something like that, it's not abundantly clear how a novice user would actually be able to generate data according to that format, basically, in order to capitalize on all that additional functionality that Gephi offers. And I myself have actually transitioned to Cytoscape because I like Gephi, but unfortunately I feel like it's been pretty unstable.
I remember you asking about, because for a while it was on the one you could download from the website was non-functional, right? And I remember you casting about, I think maybe in the DH Slack or something, asking for what other alternatives were. But it seems like the one that's there now at least runs. And but so the site the difference. So does Cytoscape, can you load different formats easier, or what have you found to be?
The primary value that I've found is that it's more consistently stable. So there's not a Java update that breaks everything.
Right.
Some strange thing where you have to download multiple versions of Java and then edit a file to point to a 3 generations back of Java or something like that.
Yeah, your hours gone.
The multiplier of the problems if you're teaching in a lab or if you're teaching across PCs and Macs and Linux computers. It's like, it's as a logistical thing, it gets kind of tough. I think it's actually faster. I think anecdotally that it's faster. It can deal with more data. I think it possibly has a wider ecosystem of, I don't know what their nomenclature is for it, if they're like plugins or add-ons or something like that. Because I gain the sense that there's perhaps a wider, maybe more STEM-focused disciplinary community that makes use of that tool.
Oh, okay.
Again, it's just my sense. I mean, I actually don't know that concretely.
I have the same impression.
Okay. Yeah, so it's just, yeah, I mean, that's my primary thing. One of the difficulties with it perhaps is that because a lot of it does seem fairly like STEM flavored or STEM inflected in terms of like translating the utility of these various add-ons or even just the names of things like in Cytoscape. It's kind of a thing to get through, but otherwise I've been fairly happy with it, I think.
Just to throw two more pieces of software into the mix. What I always taught with until about 2 years ago was Node Excel, which is a plugin for Microsoft Excel, which until 2 years ago was completely free. And then I discovered 20 minutes before a workshop that I was teaching that it had gone to a tiered model, and it was crippled so that unless you pay for it, you can't do things like visualize the network or export any of the data or anything else. That said, everybody, for the most part, knows how Excel works. And it makes it really stupidly easy to enter network data that can quickly be visualized and quickly be exported into something like Gephi or Cytoscape or whatever else. So if that, and I find that it's honestly still the easiest thing to teach humanists or novices. So if that is important to you and you would use it consistently, it might be worth trying to get some institutional licenses for the software.
It's funny because they're at Maryland, the people that created that tool.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes.
Yeah. So in theory, it should be available somehow, but probably not.
The guy who's running the ship is very nice. He's usually willing to be flexible about prices on licenses.
So can you take data? It made it sound like you can export data out of that environment into, Gephi and Cytoscape. Like it can. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. It'll export .NET files, and every piece of software that does networks will read .NET files, PyEC files. And the other one that I haven't played around with at all, but if you're just trying to get people to get data visualized in a sort of machine visualized way, databasic.io. I saw Sean Graham shared this recently. The databasic.io is doing network visualizations now, and they're like, it would be stupid simple. You're not getting any metrics, but it would be a way to turn a edge list into network visualization.
Oh, cool.
Something you're interested in doing. And then I'm sure that one of you three will remember this. Does Palladio do basic network visualizations, or is it only networks and maps?
It does network visualizations.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So that might. Sorry.
Oh, I was just looking at the data basic thing. That's cool. That could be useful. Yeah, so Google Fusion Tables does really basic network visualizations too, and students sometimes like that because they can embed the interactive version on WordPress or whatever. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I think there's like a limit of 200 nodes or something. So, and you can't run any metrics or anything. But often people don't care. They just want to see the picture.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I want like the as far as the metrics go, like I guess is that something that you do if you had? I mean, I guess you have to be able to see it first, and then once you can see it, then you can think about measuring it in different ways, or no?
Well, so honestly, when I'm teaching this, and usually I admit I have longer than Thomas does. He says he does 1 to 3 hours. I usually start at 3 hours and go up to say 40 for DHSI. Is I'll have the students whiteboard out the metrics before we even touch Gephi or anything else.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, and I won't have them like press any button in Gephi until they actually know by hand how these things are done. Degree centrality is easy. You're just counting the amount of edges that are attached to a node. But the other sorts of centrality can also be pretty easy. So closeness centrality, you're asking how close a node is to every other node on the network. I will give every single student one particular node in the network that we're looking at. I'll assign that node to them. And then they just have to count what the path length is to every other node in the network is, and it'll be like a 15 node network. It'll be a small network. And you just count all those path lengths, and you divide by the number of nodes, and then you get your close, it's the average path length.
Yeah, Purdom was telling me something, you do something with yarn or something, like where you have, is that the same exercise or no? Was that you or no?
So we were talking about this on Twitter at some point.
Okay.
And I mentioned yarn, although that's not what I wound up using. So when I'm teaching, I think this was in this discussion, when I'm teaching PageRank, the Google PageRank algorithm, it is statistically equivalent to the chance that you will hit a website if you start like randomly clicking hyperlinks on the web. And so the way that I teach that is I have everybody form into a network standing outside where, you know, I'm only connected to you 3 people. And then I get a kickball, and I have them throw a kickball around only to the people to whom they are connected. And then they just count how often they receive the kickball, and that is equivalent to their page rank. So then we all go inside, we turn that network into an actual network in Gephi or whatever else, we calculate the page rank, and it's proportionally equivalent to the amount of times they caught the kickball.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah, I mean, I really like teaching the metrics more than I like teaching the computational aspect of them. I think that people grasp it a lot more if you teach it those first rather than second.
Okay.
But I realize you don't have as much time as I usually do, which
yeah, it sounds like, because when you do that focus on the metrics, is that like a semester long class type of thing, or is it
so I mean, I've done it in a semester long class. I've done it at DHSI, which is essentially the equivalent of a semester long class. I do it sometimes for like 3 to 5 hour things, but I'll do easier metrics. So, for example, one of the projects that I have students do occasionally is remake the Moretti-Hamlet map graph. And, you know, you can teach a really basic centrality, like closeness centrality. That's something, you know, you can teach in 20 or 30 minutes what the concept behind it is. And then have them compare the centrality that Moretti talks about with whatever it was that they came up with when they're actually doing the numbers, to see whether or not they come to the same conclusions that Moretti does. I find the students really like redoing or testing Moretti. That's always been a favorite. And that way you don't have to start from scratch with a new network. So you're all like, you don't have to also teach how to make a network or what making a network data set means, and like pulling data from a messy world and turning it into a network, which is yet another lesson.
Right.
One thing that like I found really useful to let students know at the beginning is that, you know, network analysis doesn't really refer, of course, it doesn't really refer to the tool. It doesn't necessarily refer to like the statistical processes either, but network analysis is more like a hypothesis about the way the world works. And like for I think, because that helps them understand like why you could do network analysis on something that like doesn't look like a graph, or like, you know, why anyone would do network analysis in the first place.
Yeah.
What was I going to say?
Yeah, that was just as an aside. That was these paper graphs that came back. I remember being surprised at I expected just to get kind of like, you know, authors related to each other or that kind of thing, but they're quite varied. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, I was going to say, I sometimes do a yarn exercise too. It doesn't really work, but they like it anyway. I keep doing it even though it doesn't work. So like,
what doesn't work?
Well, so I use it to try to impart the difference between a one mode and a two mode network. So like I used it at, I taught a very brief network intro at a scholarly society. So I had various people be members of special interest groups, and then of which there are many, and then I had other people be like just people, and then they would have a piece of yarn connecting them to a special interest group if they were a member. So then they could all look at each other and say, oh, you know, we're co-members of this group, or like, oh, he's members of multiple groups, whatever. So he's really bridging a lot of communities. And then the challenge is like to get the people who represent the special interest groups to step out. And then the people who are just people are supposed to like just try and connect to each other. So that's going from a two mode to a one mode network. And it doesn't work because no one can remember like who's connected to whom, and there's never enough yarn, and it's often like, kind of confusing, but people still seem to like it because they get the idea that like that's the difference, is that like you're removing that intermediary and trying to connect one thing directly to its like similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
It's cool.
Going off what you said a second ago of showing students that networks don't have to come from things that are already shaped like networks. One of the assignments that I teach that people seem to grasp is I give them a text. Usually, if like I teach a lot of early modernists, so I like get the Diary of Samuel Pepys, but whatever text that has a lot of people interacting in it is fine. It could be a novel, it could be whatever else. And then I have them form into 4 or 5 different small groups. And over the course of 40 or 50 minutes, have each of them try to make their own version of a network out of the same 2 pages of text.
That's a good idea.
And then they all share what their networks were and what decisions they made in making those networks.
That's cool.
Yeah. I do something kind of similar, but I didn't think to give them all the same thing. That's a really cool twist. But like just for like a take-home assignment, I'll give them a link to the Granta website and just tell them pick a short story and make a network out of it and use Google Fusion tables. And they always really like that assignment. I guess they also like reading short stories. So
yeah.
Yes, like a self-contained short story seems like a much better idea than two days of the Diary of Samuel Pepys.
No, that's really useful. This has helped a lot already.
I will say though, it's hard, and I always teach it as part of DH 101, but we only have 10 weeks, and so I can only spend like 2 or 3 classes on it at most, and they don't get it. like they get what it is, basically. They get that network analysis exists and that you can do things with it, but they don't get it to the extent that they feel confident doing it on their own. So, if I were, and I can tell that because they have the option of using it in their final project and nobody ever does because they're not sure how. So I guess you would want more time than I give if you really want them confidently like using it in their research.
Yeah, I mean it's very comparable in a way because it's like 3 classes, 3 or 4. And we had last time we had Matt Lincoln because he was at Maryland then, and he gave a really nice talk about his work with Dutch engravers, right? And we're showing it like, I mean, he just did a really amazing talk about like his research and sort of connect. And so I think that connected with a lot of people because they had this basic understanding of what a network was from, goofing around with me. But then like they had a researcher come in and say like, look, this is my dissertation, right? Like, I think that was kind of fun. But they didn't have to do anything with it at the end. And I guess it kind of speaks to like what the goals are for the class, I think. I mean, they do have like I said, like they had this assignment to write a data story, which was almost like the inverse of, taking the short story and extracting the network. It was like doing it the other way around. Like, yeah, I have this network of social media data, people talking to other people. What can I say about, this network that I found? And it was a struggle, because like you said, Scott, it was kind of messy, right? Like it's very messy, the data you get out of. I mean, it's very incomplete in lots of ways, and that kind of makes it fun to sort of infer things, just to make up a story, right? It doesn't need to be true; it can just be a story about the data.
Yeah, I would say that. So I really like teaching, like this network analysis thing in particular. So I think like intellectually, conceptually, it's like very, very interesting to me. And it has a nice sort of shine to it because it just looks like a cool visualization to start out with. So it's a nice way to begin trying to talk about something. But I agree with Miriam that it's pretty difficult. I feel like it kind of have like mixed success in terms of people feeling comfortable enough to actually leverage it to make arguments. And it brings to mind back in the era of DH when a lot of us wrote blog posts, I guess, which was maybe, I remember, I think pretty soon after there was like a topic modeling workshop at Myth, I think in 2012. And Trevor Owens wasn't there, but he wrote a post sort of like reflecting on, I think just like, it's such a, of that period, like on the Twitter conversation that was happening around the Institute.
We were more innocent then.
Yeah, and it was something about the difference between discovery and justification, which is, an interesting sort of way to think about it, in terms of humanists using a lot of these methods. I think that the core of it that he was saying was that, you can use these things to find things, but then find patterns. But once you actually want to say that this is actually a pattern and that this thing is actually significant, that there's this like fuzzy zone of, insecurity where you need to learn like way more stuff, like in order to figure it out, whether or not you can say something. And I feel like in particular, even if it's like relatively easy, Scott, I would like to communicate like what is and how you calculate centrality or something like that. Still then getting to the point where someone feels comfortable to actually marshal those things in support of an argument is like pretty tough to do. So I don't know.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think like I always try to think about a way to like make that obviously more of a possibility, but I don't know.
I mean, so it depends on your students and how engaged they are and how far along in the program they are. Like, if you have the sort of students who really enjoy engaging with network theory plot analysis, the Hamlet Franco Moretti thing, I do think I mean, usually what I do is I have the students redo, 3 or 4 of the different sort of qualitative metrics that he suggests, and they all, like, almost all of them are it doesn't quantitatively play out the way Moretti qualitatively has it played out. So I think that particular project helps in, showing, I guess, how not to make arguments with networks.
Ouch.
But at the same time, they can then sort of make a counter argument, right? They say, well, no, in fact, this person is a more importantly central character in Hamlet.
Yeah, and I guess there's also the question of, like, shifting what the basis is for making the argument, right? Like, if the premise isn't rooted in taking advantage of some of the network metrics, and it's like purely just trying to have some visual orientation to the content, or I don't know if you change the terms of debate, I guess we do that in humanities a lot. So I don't know what you all think about that in terms of teaching this stuff in a way that's not so closely tied to the metrics or, like, the network theory, and that perhaps just the representational aspect lends itself to other types of arguments.
I've actually started doing that, and I'm always like, oh, I bet this would drive Scott crazy when I do that. But I'm always like, network analysis people are going to get on your case because, like, oh, this measure of centrality isn't valid for this kind of network or whatever. But I'm just like, I think humanists think about connections in a different way, and it's very, like, a literature scholar wouldn't make an argument based on, like, page rank or any other kind of centrality. So I've started encouraging people, like, just play with it and see if it suggests something to you, just like you said, Thomas, and then see if you can find, see if that's actually supported by other evidence. I just don't think we're at the place where people have a common understanding or acceptance of, like, network theory as the way the world works.
You guys are reminding me of like Bruno Latour and, like, Ant and, the actor network theory, or because it, in some ways, like, it, I don't know, has that entered any of your guys, like, sort of talking about this stuff at all? Because I think, it's kind of a social sciencey kind of approach, I guess, more than a humanist one, but it has a lot of, I don't know, I think it might be a bridge too far to try to explain Latour and network theory, like, but you guys are reminding me of it the way you're talking about it, though, like, just sort of following the actors and sort of building networks and stuff.
It's especially in the world of science or scholarly communication studies and citation analysis, people bridge Latour and network analysis a lot. As far as weaving a narrative around a network, I don't know, I might be playing into the apocryphal millennial stereotype here, but I feel as though everybody likes analyzing their own networks. So if you can get people to extract a Facebook co-friend network or a Twitter network of which they are at the center, you can perhaps have them weave a narrative about their own social circles that has the visualization as a backdrop, which then wouldn't necessarily take any measurements or anything into account, but it's just an anchor through which you can start having a conversation about the social world that you find yourself in a way that's easier to present than just a bunch of paragraphs one after each the other.
And they can say, like, well, this is, they know, like, this is not true. I'm not better friends with her than him. So that gives them, like, a ground truth to use.
Right.
One thing I do every year, but it's clever, but I think it might just confuse people more than it helps them, is, like, have them take a survey and give them a list of, like, So like, what's your favorite book? And 5 options. What's your favorite musician? And give them 5 options. What's your favorite thing to do when you're relaxing? And give them 5 options. And then use that to build a homophilic network with all the students in the class. And they really like that because they can see like, oh, we like the same thing. And then take those preferences out of the network so it becomes like a one mode network, and they're just connected to each other, and say, oh, you guys have so much in common, and like run community detection and say, oh, here's how I should assign groups next year, letting you choose whatever. And they like that because it's them, it's fun, but it goes so fast and they can't really follow the steps. So I don't know if I think it's clever, but it's also kind of confusing for them.
What would you use were you using Google Fusion tables for that, or was it something else, or just kind of?
I was using Cytoscape for that. And then I always used Gephi to go from a 2-mode to a 1-mode network. But then when I switched to Cytoscape, I wasn't able to do that. But then Matt Lincoln wrote like a really nice little R program called Projector. So Project OR that can convert from one to the other. So now I just use that.
Okay.
Plus Cytoscape.
Well, so yeah, I guess R is always a good way to end conversations, right? At least for me. Yeah, no, this has been really super useful. I really appreciate you sharing all these ideas. I guess I feel kind of stuck in a way, like, because Matt kind of wants to introduce them to this big data idea, but I guess in a lot of ways I'm sort of, it's a thing that I kind of struggle with. I think the readings that Matt is doing around it are sort of critiquing the idea of big data. So they should be, like they should be like comfortable sort of being critical about the idea. But it's like, how do I don't know, I guess like these examples that you guys have given me, I think that they're largely kind of like small data. I mean, I guess if you took like, friend of a friend network or something like that, it could get kind of big, but I like these examples because I think part of the problem with big data is like people can't really sort of think about it, right? It's difficult to think about. And so thinking about it at this scale, I think could help them sort of extrapolate, like, okay, well, there's 15 nodes in this network, but you can imagine something larger, right? I don't know. So maybe I can come to terms with, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's exactly it, right? You start small, and you convince them enough that it works on the small scale example that they can actually grasp the network. And then you say, okay, now let's throw 100,000 more tweets into the box, and look, it's doing the same thing. And you can trust it when it's big because it worked when it was small.
Yeah, I think starting small is a really good idea.
I think maybe part of the lesson for the students here would be big data ain't nothing except for a lot of small data together.
Yeah. If they left with that understanding, I would be happy.
I don't know why I'm thinking about this. I think this was maybe in 2010 or 2011. I wrote a blog post, maybe 2010, that was about first.
Don't you miss blogs?
Sorry. No, I still have one, but it was like I had written something about big data, and I used that, like, unwittingly used that volume, velocity, variety thing. And then some guy at like Gartner who coined the term reached out to me and was like, I created that.
Oh no.
So now every time I think about big data, I think about Gartner and consulting companies.
I think that's a pretty valid association.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just probably just not super useful, I don't think, as a category, but
Yeah. And I guess like you were saying, like if they can have the understanding of like just sort of like the context of the small data, how, they might, the graph might suggest one thing, but, Miriam, you were talking about like, well, I know that I'm not best friends with her, or, whatever the sort of the real life experience versus the sort of like what the network is showing, like getting in touch with that and then sort of throwing big data into it. Like, I think sort of it exaggerates that problem, right? It really sort of brings home like the critique of big data, I think, right? In a way that, yeah, it'd be hard to sort of approach it abstractly, I think, without sort of having that, like that small data kind of experience of it.
Oh, I guess this is making me think of like, there's this piece by, I don't remember what it was called. It's by I think it's a French historian, Claire Lemercier,
yeah.
Lemercier, where part of the work is problematizing the use of network methods over historical time, basically, over like periods of time, and
cool.
how like the interpretation of relationships between, I think it was like people in a town or something like that. When you look at it, at the data in one way, it appears to flatten time. So it's like, it's a lot of data, a lot of like small data recording interactions and things like that. But if you don't like kind of like look at it carefully, either as the representation or in the data, you lose the sense of, you just get like all these red herrings in terms of attributing value to interaction without understanding that these interactions have been taking place over decades. I don't know how long. Scott, do you remember?
It was decades. I think it was longer, maybe almost 100 years, but it's been a while. I don't remember.
Yeah, but it's in terms of thinking about an actual example of like big data within a disciplinary context. I guess that could be an example of it. Lots of small data aggregated over 100 years or something like that. And some of the issues in terms of trying to analyze it.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the talk that Matt gave about his work, because a lot of it was looking at the graph over time. Sort of like, if you just flatten it into one graph, you kind of miss the story that's going on, right? That's the thing I remember most about it anyway. Yeah.
Wendy Chen gave this amazing talk on homophilic networks, and like she traced their origin to redlining, and it historically in the United States, and then also, of course, connected them to our current situation, where we're sort of siloed according to affinity groups on social media. And it was just amazing, and it was one of the it was like, oh, this is how a master does it. I don't think she's published it yet, but when she does, I think it'll be like the perfect thing to assign.
The origin of the tendency to create these homophilic networks. Interesting. I would like to read that too.
I know, it's so good. It was an amazing talk. It was at the American Studies Association last year. So, yeah. Well, I should probably get a move on because I have to go to a meeting across campus.
Okay. Yeah, it's almost the top of the hour anyway, so I really appreciate your time.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for making this happen.
Sure. Thank you. I really appreciate hearing how you two, Miriam and Thomas, teach this stuff. So
me too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, totally. All right. Good luck, Ed. Let us know how it goes.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck, Ed.
Thanks.
Yeah, definitely keep us in the loop. Be well, and talk to you very shortly on Twitter, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody.
See you.
Bye.